We are a blended family.
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 We're a blended family.
We are a blended family.
We are a blended family.
We are a blended family.
And we are a blended family.
You're listening to ChristianLivingRadio.com with the Snaps.
All right, blended families, week 2 of 12. What is a blended family? Last week we were talking about what is a godly marriage. This week it's what is a blended family. So here are at least some of the types. There's remarriage after divorce, remarriage after the loss of a spouse, different cultures, nationalities, religions, adoption, and even first marriages. We consider them a collision of two families. So unless you're an orphan, both of you, there's two families getting married, being blended. So we're going to talk about remarriage after divorce for the most part, and then remarriage after the loss of a spouse. Those are the two biggest categories. So I'll just talk about some of these other things first, and then we'll get into the meat. Different cultures, nationalities, religions. I think next week we'll be talking about who's normal is normal in depth. And that's kind of where we're coming from. And that collision of two families, everything that you've ever experienced in your whole life is your normal. It defines what you think is true, what you think is right, wrong, and all those kind of things. And when you come together with someone else who has a totally different normal, whole different life, then how do you figure out which one is the right one? All right? So, like I said, we'll talk about that a lot more in depth later, but basically, it's apples and oranges, and they're both good, they're different. It's not about right and wrong, and that's where the head needs to be, because most people think, my way is right, therefore, your way is wrong. So then there's a lot of disagreement, there's strife, stress, arguments about right and wrong when it's really just preferences. And once we understand that we're all created in the image of God, that normal that we're shooting for to blend a family is God's normal. It's not about us, it's about Him. So that's where we try to go with that. It's where we try to go with our pyramid over there that we talked about last week. There's adoption. For those of us who have accepted Christ, we have been adopted into God's family. And something I heard the other day, there's a big difference between being like a biological child in a family versus an adopted child. For those that are adopted, there's no way to unadopt. Like in a will or something like that. You're in. You can't be thrown out. Biological kids, you can leave them out of the will. You can walk away from them. You can do all sorts of things. But for an adoption, you're in. And that's the way it is in the kingdom. We're in. Once we're in, we're in. And there's nothing that is going to be so bad that we get thrown out. So adoption is actually a pretty good deal, because we get the name, we get all the benefits and everything else, and we just, our Father in heaven loves us unconditionally, and we're not going to be thrown out. First marriages, like I said, unless you're an orphan, you're bringing a lot of history with you. And even if you are an orphan, you have some kind of a history. Maybe not a very complicated one, but it's probably full of a lot of woundedness and hurt feelings and different things like that. So there's going to be a lot of things that need to be dealt with in a situation like that. So even that first marriage, which is the way God wants all marriages to be, like a first marriage, there's still a lot of stuff that you have to deal with. Okay. Remarriage after divorce. That's the biggest category that we deal with in blended families. So we'll spend probably more time on that one than anything. One of the biggest drawbacks to a remarriage after a divorce is there's a lot of spiritual baggage. Okay? Marriage is spiritual warfare. And if there's been a divorce, then you have been the victim or a casualty of spiritual warfare. It's a whole other class. 10 weeks we deal with that. Okay? But the thing is, and this is like that whole other class in a nutshell, you have to realize you're a casualty. You're not a victim. You're a casualty. To me, that's a different thing. To me, a victim is, something happened, but then it develops into a mentality. Casualty is, something happened, but I survived. Okay? So there's a lot of spiritual baggage. You have basically used the law to break a covenant, right? Marriage is supposed to be a covenant, till death do us part, and we'll talk about that over here. But this is a sin issue. There's a lot of sin going on, which now everybody's in the flesh, and you're whatever you are, and then you're telling me I'm the same thing, and it's just a lot of knocking of heads, and the sin is not being dealt with, so you just decide to quit. Okay? Now, it only takes one to make a divorce. It takes two to make a marriage. All right? So, two people have to be able to work together to really do marriage. If it's selfishness on one person's part, that's all it takes to make a divorce. All right? So, the spiritual baggage is you've used the law to break a covenant. In God's eyes, the only way to break a covenant is somebody dies. Right? So now you've used the law to break a covenant. So what does that do? If you're still in the covenant, you're still under God's grace. If you use the law to break the covenant, now you're under the law again. Christ came to put us under grace to get us out from under the law. Well, now you're just taking yourself out of grace and put yourself under the law, because now the court is going to tell you this is how much your alimony is, this is how much you get to see your kids, this is how much the child support is, and all those kind of things. So you're under a lot of court-directed influence. That's part of the spiritual baggage. Divorce is a sin problem, so there's a lot of spiritual baggage that needs to be dealt with before you move on. Like I said, there's a lot of law that you have to abide by now that you didn't before. But the big thing is, prior to moving on with any other relationships, you need to deal with the root causes of what messed that one up.
You're listening to ChristianLivingRadio.com with Doctors Larry and Carol Snapp, Blended Families Ministry. Class is already in session. Let's rejoin them now.
Okay. We have another couple that teaches our Beyond Divorce class, Dan and Liz Smith. And Dan is really good at drawing trees. I'm not so much. But this is a tree, in case you couldn't tell. Okay? Trees have pretty big roots, right? But we don't usually see those. They're underground. This is ground. Okay, the roots are down here, and what we see, though, are symptoms and or fruit of whatever that tree produces from the roots. So we need to deal with the root causes so that we're not just dealing with symptoms. That we go to the doctor, they treat symptoms most of the time. Usually you got to go to the specialist to figure out what the root cause is. Then they can fix it. But if you just keep pruning the limbs and picking the fruit, they just keep coming back, right? So if you don't deal with the sin, confess it and deal with that, get forgiveness for it, get healed from it, you're just going to keep taking those causes, those problems into whatever the next relationship is. Okay, now there could be adultery, addictions, abuse, all sorts of different things that are the root of what caused the divorce. Basically, it's selfishness. That's kind of the root of everything, selfishness. Selfishness will cause you to become stupid. And then you make bad choices based on the stupidity caused by the selfishness. But all these things cause wounds, right? So the wounds have to be healed. God is all about math. He likes to multiply. Okay, so if you've been in a marriage, you've been in a relationship, even though it didn't end up in marriage and it ended, you got to get back to being whole again so that God can multiply you. He likes to multiply a whole one times a whole one, and he gets one flesh out of it. It's not, he doesn't add, he likes to add, but he rather multiply. So it's not like he's adding you with someone else and gets two. He multiplies you with someone else, and he has one flesh. So, just be aware of that. Become whole before you start something else, right? And you want to find somebody that's whole. If you're whole, but you find somebody that's a half, you're going to end up being a half, right? So whatever the vacuum is that's not healed here, whatever that vacuum in you is, sucks the life out of the other person. And if you're both less than whole, it's just one big vacuum going on. Have you ever tried to put two vacuums together? You can barely pull them apart. So, yeah, try it. Let me know how it works. It's not that easy to get them apart when they're both running. So, be whole. Find someone. Rather, don't even find. Wait for God to bring you someone that's whole.
Amen. Yep.
And then it's going to be good. But if you go hunting, you're going to find somebody that's less than whole. So then there's consequences of that. But if you're not whole and you end up with somebody that's not whole, it's just two people sucking the life out of each other. Okay? Forgiveness is what it takes to heal. If you have any unforgiveness in you, you're not whole. It's got to be whatever that was down here, jealousy, abuse, or any of those things, the selfishness, it has to die. Then you plant a new tree. Okay? But whenever you try to deal with the stuff up here, it's just going to keep coming back. Keep coming back. And the thing about divorce, though, is God allows do-overs. God is a God of restoration. He's a God of reconciliation. He would rather we submit to Him, deal with our root causes, and then get reconciled and restored, and then move on. But, life is far from perfect, so we have a lot of divorce situations, and most people don't want to be alone, so they find somebody else to spend some time with, and they get married, they get into a relationship, but they didn't deal with anything, so they just keep bringing it with them. Okay,